Good evening and welcome to the 560th episode of Travel Itch Radio. I am Dan Schlossberg and we are in the 13th season of Travel Itch, the show that lets you enjoy the pleasures of travel from the comfort of your armchair. Every week at this time, we talk to people representing destinations, hotels, airlines, railroads, car rental companies, and others in the world of travel and hospitality, from authors and bloggers to broadcasters and publicists. If it's got anything to do with travel, it's got everything to do with Travel Itch Radio. And our guest today is Maya Davis, director of the Riversdale House Museum in Prince George's County, Maryland. Welcome, Maya, to Travel Itch Radio.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, it's August and the start of International Underground Railroad Month. For viewers who don't know what that is, please enlighten us. What was the Underground Railroad and how long did it last?
So the Underground Railroad, I would start by saying, well, International Underground Railroad Month is something that was kicked off by the state of Maryland, who then joined forces with the state of Michigan, and it's now taken on to be a much larger celebration of heroes connected to the Underground Railroad. So when you think about the Underground Railroad, you're talking about a specific period of time in the 19th century where people are escaping in a heightened moment. And what the National Park Service likes to do is really highlight all of the stories related to flight from Maryland. And so understanding that, there was an increase in the 19th century as you see people fleeing from different places across the country, but people were already fleeing from different places in Maryland and other states as early as the moments that, Africans were imported and brought here to this country. So it's a very specific time and it goes all the way through emancipation. But, I think when people say that, they assume that it incorporates all eras of flight that took place, but it is a specific time period.
You're based in Maryland, which I believe was the hub of the Underground Railroad. Could you tell us how and when it started and who was responsible?
Oh, there's so many people. So Maryland is a really unique state in that it's a border state and it bordered along a number of free states, like Pennsylvania. And so we have a lot of figures that are well known who are connected to Maryland. And just because our proximity to those free states, we have a lot of well-known figures that are connected, like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, Henry Highland Garnett, Thomas Garrett, who's really based in Delaware, Pennsylvania, actually touches down in Maryland and connects with people here. And so it's a great network of individuals. Some instances people are escaping on their own, but being able to have that network of people who know the waterways, the roadways, and the best pathways into a free state it is really so amazing. And that's what makes Maryland a hotbed, because we are so close. So we boast the largest free Black population during that time period. So that makes a huge difference. It doesn't really always involve like going to New York or New Jersey or Canada. Sometimes people are going to hide in plain sight in places like Baltimore or nearby Washington, D.C.
Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass were among the most prominent runaway slaves. We know there's a statue to both at the Maryland State House in Annapolis. Please share their stories with our viewers.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited. I was really excited to work on the team that actually put the statues in the State House of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, but they are probably the two most well-known figures from the Underground Railroad from our state of Maryland. Frederick Douglass escaped from Talbot County. Well, actually, he was from Talbot County, but escaped from Baltimore with the assistance of his wife, Anna Murray Douglass, who does not always get as much credit as she probably should in assisting him in plotting out his escape. Harriet Tubman was also from the Eastern Shore and actually escaped from the Eastern Shore and returned a number of times to actually come back and help her family escape, including her brother, her parents, a couple of close family friends, nieces, and things like that. She made a number of trips, and I think that's what makes her so unique and powerful to the story that we tell about the Underground Railroad. And a lot of times we talk about them in silos as individuals, but they are figures that knew each other. And I think that their experience was very different. Frederick Douglass being a male, and so he carried a different gravitas in terms of abolitionist circles. He was able to travel internationally and go to Europe. He actually lived in Scotland. He had been to Ireland and traveled the UK quite extensively. And so, his experience was very different, and he traveled as an orator. He was someone who had been taught to read and write by his slave owners. And so, it's just a very different experience on the way that he was able to navigate leaving the Underground Railroad, and then thinking about Harriet Tubman, who didn't actually have the learning through reading and writing, but had common sense and a wealth of knowledge related to the waterways and the roadways, and actually embedded in who she was, that network of people that lived and worked on the Eastern Shore to help secure the freedom of others beside herself.
Tell us about the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Park and Visitor Center. Is it one of our newest national parks?
It is one of the newer national parks. It opened some years back. I was still actually working for the state of Maryland when it opened. It is one of the newer sites, but it's a dual park where it's kind of jointly shared by the state of Maryland parks as well as the National Park Service. And it's an amazing visitor center that tells the life story of Harriet Tubman from her very beginnings, being born in Dorchester County and being enslaved there, through her escape and her life afterwards in Auburn, New York, and living in, like, just helping people to understand that when you are living as an escaped slave in free states, it doesn't mean that you've crossed and you've been successful and all is well. Like, she had to move a number of times to keep that safety network around her. And she had actually been to Cape May, New Jersey. She had been to Canada and a number of other places before she actually settled in Auburn, where she actually died. And I think what is like most unknown about Harriet Tubman is this thread of like Underground Railroad and enslavement. It goes forth. She was a very active suffragette and was well respected on the Black circuit as a suffragette. And so I think that's one of the things that I wish people knew more about her life after escaping and then eventual emancipation throughout the country, and the work that she did after it, and opening a home for elderly people in Auburn.
We're talking International Underground Railroad Month with Maya Davis. What Underground Railroad artifacts can visitors find in Maryland?
I think the most prominent artifacts they can do are our structures, our cemeteries. They are like some of the most prominent artifacts that we have. If you visit a number of cemeteries like National Harmony Cemetery, you will see Underground Railroad figures there, like Elizabeth Keckley, who we know famously for making Mary Todd Lincoln's dress, but she's also someone who has been closely connected with the Underground Railroad. Also, the sons of Frederick Douglass are at that cemetery. They were very instrumental in helping support their father's newspaper and by actually being typesetters and things like that, and actually had welcomed when their family lived in places like Rochester and in Massachusetts. You know, their family, by the time they were adults, they had already engaged with a number of people who had actually been on the run from a variety of different states, and actually grew up learning the abolitionist movement, the techniques and the trades and things like that. And like part of that is like not just running, but being able to spread the word. And so we have those artifacts. And then we have homes like mine, the Riversdale House Museum, where I work, where people like Adam Francis Plummer and his wife, Emily Plummer, who had escaped from another plantation, but eventually came back to Riversdale to be with Adam. All of these places are connected to the Underground Railroad by their proximity of people who were actually impacted by this system coming to those sites. So when you think about the National Park Service Network of Freedom, they document the stories where people actually were born who may have fled, a place where they fled, or a place where they took cover. And so all over our state, we have great sites. And if you ever visit something like the Harriet Tubman Museum, there is a byway that points out sites that are significantly connected to her, but it connects to so many other unknown individuals who have actually escaped.
What special events are planned to commemorate the heroes and heroines of the Underground Railroad?
Oh, there's so many. I know just from today, we actually had a kickoff for International Underground Railroad, which August is the kickoff month. The actual month for International Underground Railroad Month is in September. And so we had a number of our sites visit Riversdale today to highlight and promote some of those events. And one of the events that's really exciting is actually happening this Saturday at Historic Sodderly in St. Mary's County. Sodderly was the home of Governor Plater, and they had a number of escapes, and probably most famously the escape during the War of 1812, when more than 40 individuals escaped and fled to the British and successfully secured their freedom and resettled in places like Canada and in Trinidad. And so it's really a great place, but they're going to have a day of unity and healing where they bring together the descendants of the enslaved as well as the slave owner. And they have a day, and the program is really unique in that the descendants actually lead and create this day, this program. The museum has really been very intentional about bringing them in. Another program that I really want to highlight, and I want to make sure I read this correctly, is Echoes of the Enslaved. This is in Prince George's County Parks and Recreation, which is another colleague of mine. We work for the same organization. So Echoes of the Enslaved will take place on Saturday, September the 28th from 4 to 9 p.m. at Darnell's Chance in Prince George's County. And then another one of my colleagues will be having a book signing at Marietta House Museum on September the 12th. The book is Flee North, a book talk with author Scott Shane. So I'm really excited to highlight that. And then there'll be a lot of Underground Railroad tours at Marietta House, at Riversdale House Museum, which is my site. And if you come to my site, you'll actually be able to get passports to learn about the individuals who were connected to the Underground Railroad at my site.
Do you want to mention the 1856 project from the University of Maryland?
Oh, yes. So the 1856 project is one of many university projects that are looking at the role enslavement had on the establishment of their universities. From my understanding, from my earliest connection with the university studying slavery, it started at UVA. But since I've been here at Riversdale, we've had a great opportunity. I serve on the board of the 1856 project, and it's the University of Maryland's project to look at the role that enslaved workers played at the university. And we have a really close tie because Charles Benedict Calvert, who was the third proprietor of Riversdale, actually was one of the co-founders of the university, the Maryland Agricultural College, which is now University of Maryland at College Park. And so they're doing a lot of descendant work and research and working with a lot of research fellows to uncover their history. And it's a very rich history that's being uncovered. And so I'm excited to see this project unfold. It's still very much in its infancy, but it's really taking shape.
Among the many hats you wear, Maya, you're the vice chair of the Annapolis 1864 Commission to commemorate Maryland Emancipation Day. So that makes this an anniversary year. What are you planning?
So that commission actually had a life ending. So it was really to commemorate in 2014 the anniversary of the emancipation of Maryland enslaved individuals, which is really unique because this does not fall under the Emancipation Proclamation as those states that were in rebellion to the Union. Maryland was still a part of the Union and had to establish its own Emancipation Day. So that commission was actually set up to commemorate the emancipation of enslaved individuals here in Maryland, which was really unique. And it was something that took form to actually become an annual celebration in a lot of counties in the subsequent years. And so you can see a lot of information about that. There's not going to be anything from that commission coming up, but as we kind of look forward to the Maryland 250th and we think about the Revolutionary War, it'll give us a chance to think about how people have celebrated emancipations from that very period, from the Revolutionary period all the way through the end of the Civil War.
And you mentioned Riversdale House Museum where you work. We know it's a one-time plantation home in Prince George's County. What can you tell us about it?
Oh, Riversdale is an amazing home. It has such a rich history. We have 3 generations of the Steer and Calvert family where we tell their story, beginning with Henri Steer, who was a wealthy Flemish aristocrat from Antwerp. And he came here under the reign of terror from Napoleon. But soon after starting to do construction on Riversdale, which was done through the enslaved labor, it was built by enslaved labor, which we know, he went back to Belgium and left the home to his daughter, Rosalie Steer Calvert, who by an act of General Assembly had to get approval because women did not own property at that time. When they became married, their property that they had through their family actually went into the hands of their husbands. So Rosalie was really a unique story because she was a woman who owned property, both the house, the land, and the enslaved. And then the third proprietor was Charles Benedict Calvert, their son. So we have such a rich history on that level, but then at the level of enslaved workers, there were like an overwhelming majority of people who lived at Riversdale, both in the dwelling house of the Calverts and in 9 extant slave quarters from its inception in 1801 all the way through emancipation. And today at this ceremony, it was so moving to hear a descendant of the Plummer family, which Adam Francis Plummer was enslaved at our site, read off 6 pages of enslaved individuals who had lived and worked at Riversdale. So we have such a rich history, and Adam Francis Plummer is probably the most prominent of our enslaved individuals who lived there because he kept a diary. He documented the lives of not only his family, but other families who lived and worked at Riversdale. And so it's a great resource for us to tell the story of not only the Underground Railroad, but life at Riversdale for the enslaved.
And before you joined Riversdale House, you consulted on statewide projects relating to the African American experience in Maryland. What were some of the things you handled?
So one of the things, I'll go back to the Annapolis 1864 Commission, where we commissioned a quilt by Dr. Joan Gaither. That was a very exciting project, and it involved a lot of community engagement because quilt squares were sent out to every single county in Baltimore City. And they were sent back with the history that was important to that locale to document the story of slavery in Maryland. We also consulted on the Harriet Tubman Byway and Visitor Center that you mentioned earlier on. I actually was an intern working on the Byway when I was in grad school, plotting GPS coordinates and pointing out places that people had no idea were directly connected to Harriet Tubman that were hidden in plain sight. And, like there's just a number. We've worked with so many people, whether it was the Reginald F. Lewis Museum, when they first opened their permanent exhibition, and they utilized some of the runaway ads that we had at the Maryland State Archives and providing that documentary evidence that we had. And then also the installation of the Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman statues, which was really an exciting project for us and one of the last that I worked on. And then we also worked on the Thurgood Marshall Portrait Commission, as well as the Frederick Douglass Portrait Commission. The Frederick Douglass portrait hangs in Governor Moore's residence right now. And so it's really nice to see that. And that was painted by portrait artist Simi Knox, who's painted people like Oprah Winfrey, the Clintons, Bill and Hillary Clinton. And so it's really been exciting to work on a number of projects, some more smaller, some more larger scale projects, but it's really been nice. And it really has helped me develop a network of colleagues throughout the state.
And we are talking International Underground Railroad Month, which actually starts in September. With Maya Davis. And viewers, you're tuned to Travel-Rich Radio, now in our 13th season with Dan Schlossberg. Check us out on iTunes, LinkedIn, Instagram, or the Travel-Rich Radio Facebook page, among other places. Maya, in addition to all your other projects, you're a commissioner on the Maryland Lynching, Truth, and Reconciliation Commission. That sounds like a difficult and demanding position. Please share.
Yes, and actually the chair of that commission graced us with a libation just today as we hosted our International Underground Railroad Kickoff Month. But the Maryland Lynching, Truth, and Reconciliation Commission was a commission that was established by Delegate Joseline Pena-Milnick and voted on by the Maryland General Assembly unanimously. And we're really excited to look and grapple with the stories of lynching, because a lot of times people don't think of Maryland as a Southern state. We are both geographically and culturally Southern. We just have to start admitting it to ourselves. And we do have a legacy of lynching. While the numbers are not as far great as it is in states like Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, we do have a number, and any one story related to lynching is more than enough. We know that there are over 40 lynchings in the state, and we are doing a lot to research those cases, but then also working to connect with genealogy research that we're doing, and the descendants and descendant communities, because in some of those communities, they've been so disrupted that there are no descendants still living in this area, but there have been communities that have actually been impacted directly. And so we are working to do public hearings across the state. One of the next ones will be October the 5th in Montgomery County, and one in Prince George's County in January, and a number of others that are all on the website. We have 5 of them coming up, where we will come to each of those communities, hear out the testimonies of family members and communities of what the impact of lynchings have been in those various counties. And at the end of that, we will take a report of recommendations from the community back to the General Assembly for a movement towards healing and reconciliation.
And another demanding spot has to be your spot on the board of the Maryland Center for History and Culture, plus the Prince George's County Historical Society. What do you do there? And more importantly, how do you find the time?
I make time for the things that I'm super passionate about. I was really honored to be asked to serve on both of those boards, and I've served on the Prince George's Historical Society for a number of years, and my recent appointment to the board of the Maryland Center for History and Culture is more recent. So on the Prince George's County Historical Society, we actually took a pause during the pandemic and started to do virtual lectures and things like that. But we really are about to have a conversation about how we can better engage with the Historical Society, not just as my role on the board, but then as someone who operates a historic site in the county and how that's going to line up. And we do have a program with them coming up in October about the night that Lafayette was supposed to spend the night at Riversdale. So we're excited about that. In my role, the Maryland Center for History and Culture, I'm a newer board member, and I really am trying to find my footing there, but I did help out with their exhibition on civil rights, which was really an honor of mine. And I really like to support the work of the education team there, who do an amazing job to connect with students, especially as we think about the time during the pandemic and then post-pandemic and how we connect. And the face of the Maryland Center for History and Culture is really changing to be more inclusive. And so I'd like to think that that's been maybe like my greatest role, is the recommendations that I make for becoming more inclusive and really tuning into where they are. You know, while they are a museum that addresses the needs of the counties across the state, they are located in Baltimore City, and there's a great opportunity for them to connect with the local community.
Can visitors learn about the Underground Railroad at the Banneker Douglas Museum, where you were once interim director, and where is it located?
Yes, the Banneker Douglas Museum is located in Annapolis, Maryland, and it is led by Chanel Compton, who's an amazing director, and it is located in Annapolis. You know, I definitely encourage people to go out because it's the state's official African-American museum. It falls under the state of Maryland, and it has such a rich history. And if you go there, you will learn about the history of African-Americans in Maryland from the founding of the colony all the way through the present day. I think what's so unique about it is one side of it is a historic church structure, and the other side is the newer extended wing. And Chanel has done such an amazing job to bring in art and history and match that and engage new audiences. I'm really excited about the work that takes shape there. And you can find an original carte de visite of Frederick Douglass there, and they do talk about the Underground Railroad. And one of the lesser known figures that they really talk about is Lear Green, who was a woman who shipped herself in a box. And a lot of times we hear about Henry Box Brown. That actually was not the only story of an incident like that. And Lear Green does have that story. So please go check out the stories that are told at the Banneker Douglas Museum.
For a relatively small state, Maryland seems to have an outsized role in the history of emancipation in general, and the Underground Railroad in particular. Why was it so significant?
I think, again, going back to the point of being a border state, it was one of those states that just was on the cusp where you had free Blacks living side by side with enslaved individuals. And so there was always that movement, and even so much as an attempted slave rebellion here in the state coming out of St. Mary's County, and which was foiled. I think Maryland is a hotbed of activity to oppose slavery. It's very much a state, and not necessarily by the citizens who were owners of enslaved people, but the enslaved population itself actually was very diligent and, moving forward and, just making sure that, like they had the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like they really fought, and a lot of self-emancipation opportunities actually took place in Maryland. And it just was its location. I think the location was everything. And again, having that large free Black population, the largest in the entire country in Baltimore, made a huge difference.
If people wanted to follow the routes of the Underground Railroad, where would they go besides Maryland?
If they wanted to follow the routes, they would go so many different places. We have stories in Canada. Some of our War of 1812 stories pick up in places like Nova Scotia. You can actually see people in the Deep South, some who go into places like Mexico. You can see people that go into the Caribbean. They go to the UK. I mentioned Frederick Douglass. He was one of many people from Maryland who had actually gone to the UK for refuge. You can go so many different places, and especially as slavery is very much a global system, you can find these stories around the world. Even, in the Caribbean, where we don't give enough credence to the migration patterns there in the Caribbean and in South America, you would find these stories all over the world, because where you have people who are forced into bondage, you have people who are wanting to be out of it. So you can really go deep and way beyond the walls of Maryland.
We're talking International Underground Railroad Month with Maya Davis. Since we're talking about outside Maryland, I want to show this picture. because this is taken in New Hope, Pennsylvania. The man with the flashlight is my friend Carl Glassman, who owns the Wedgwood Inn. He found remnants of the Underground Railroad in his backyard. He did not know this was there. He just found this recently.
That's
So
amazing.
I just had to show that picture.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. And like that's just it. Like you never know where history shows up, and there's so many, remnants of the system right in our backyards. A number of churches were safe houses. A number of personal homes were safe houses. False bottom wagons were used. Various modes of transportation, and that includes trains and boats. And a lot of times people give a lot of flack about assuming that the Underground Railroad is about trains. We know that there's 2 women that we have documented in William Still's journal that actually escaped on a train. So there's just so many different touches as it pertains to this particular history in the Underground Railroad.
Since you mentioned trains, I have to mention the B&O Railroad Museum, one of the best railroad museums. It's in Baltimore. I've been there a number of times. Is there any connection between that and the Underground Railroad?
I've not done enough research to say. I've never looked at the research for the B&O Railroad Museum, but I would not be surprised if they had a direct connection. We know that trains came through near Riversdale. The train tracks are still there to this day. And so I would not be surprised. I would have to do more research on that, though.
There have been multiple movies about the Underground Railroad in that period of American history. Are there any you would recommend?
Any movies? Well, I think probably more so I would say documentaries, and not necessarily specifically only addressing the Underground Railroad. A lot of the well-done documentaries include the Underground Railroad as well as other topic points. And, some of the best things that I think are like older documentaries such as Eye on the Prize, which is a whole, volume related to the history of African Americans. And I think the work that's being done through the 1619 Project has also been very groundbreaking. Ibrahim Kendi, Stamped from the Beginning, all of these books that kind of tell about the vast experience of enslaved Africans in this country. And then some of those books, those original books from Sidney Howard Gay, William Still, who are operatives on the Underground Railroad and can give firsthand accounts of the individuals that they encountered. And even Adam Francis Plummer's diary, which is owned by the Anacostia Community Museum, they all talk about this very thing. And so I think some of those original sources, the website Doc South, which is through the University of North Carolina, it has a lot of slave narratives on it, firsthand accounts that kind of talk about life in enslavement, but then also the Underground Railroad. And so there's so many rich materials that are out there that tell the story. But I think some of those older original accounts are some of the best references that we can go back to.
Let's switch gears for a second and talk about art. You served on the Adam Francis Plummer Portrait Commission. Who was he? What was your role there?
Yes, so Adam Francis Plummer was an enslaved man at Riversdale. He came there when he was 10 years old. He had been owned by the Calvert family at their home, Mount Airy, and was brought over by George Calvert to actually serve his son, Charles Benedict Calvert. And he actually lived at our site through emancipation. But Adam, as I kind of shared earlier, he actually kept a diary, and that's what makes him so unique. It's one of the rare finds in our country where you have an enslaved individual who could read and write and actually kept the diary while he was still maintained under the bondage of his owner, and actually just did, he did so much. But what I think was just so telling about him, he was truly a family man and really wrote to his wife. The letters are transcribed in the Journal of Negro History. They were actually donated by his daughter to Carter G. Woodson himself. And, just such a huge documentary piece of evidence that we wouldn't have otherwise, because the way that the enslaved documents themselves is very different than the way his owners would have documented him. And he's just so key. He really is what I would call Prince George's County's Frederick Douglass. He had a family. He had a wife, Emily Saunders Plummer, who was enslaved at Three Sisters Plantation, not far from Riversdale. And they had 9 children who lived. And we're looking at some research that's actually showing that they may have had a few more children that died in infancy. And, like being a father and making sure that he kept his family together as much as possible is amazing. And he was brought to Riversdale with 2 brothers. And so we have a very early family tree. When we think about Alex Haley's roots, we give a lot of credence to that, but there's a lot of documentary evidence about family genealogical information that wasn't intended to be genealogical, but it was a documentation. And Adam Francis Plummer was one of the earlier people to do that. And I think we're so fortunate to still have that survive.
Glad you mentioned Roots, Maya, because the hero of Roots allegedly landed in Annapolis. So what is the Annapolis Port Market Project? Any relationship?
So the Port Market Project is something that is done nationwide by Ann Chen, where she works with different organizations, museums, historic sites, government officials to actually put up port markers in places where Africans first touched down in the colony of Maryland or Virginia, North Carolina. There's a number of places, and it's a whole website you can actually go and see. And we were really excited to know that we could do that in Annapolis. And the sign hasn't been put up just yet. That work now is being led by Chris Haley, who's my former supervisor, the city of Annapolis historian, one of their historians locally, Janice Hayes Williams, and it is just so great to see it happen. And so the port marker should be coming with the redesign of the city dock in the town of Annapolis.
Our viewers always like to know a little bit more about our guests, so please share where you were born and raised and how you came to.
I heard you say where I was born and raised. I missed the last part of that. But what I will say is I was born. Oh, go ahead. I'll let you finish your question.
Oh, where you were born and raised, where you went to school, and how you came to Riversdale House.
Okay, so I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I am a D.C. resident. I live in the house that was my great-grandmother's. That's where I'm calling in from right now. Wow. And so I went to school in D.C. and Maryland. I went to Maryland for high school in Prince George's County, but all of my other schools were in DC, all the way down to preschool. And I graduated from Howard University and George Washington University, and my degrees are in history and museum studies. So I'm a true DC girl, but I really am passionate about local history and then the lesser known stories.
Our guest today has been Maya Davis, director of the Riversdale House Museum and expert on the African American experience in Maryland. Thank you, Maya, for visiting with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's truly been a pleasure and an honor to be here at Travel Itch Radio.
Thank you. And I hope you enjoy the Hank Aaron book that I sent you. This is the 50th anniversary of Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's home run record. And viewers, this is your chance to share in the excitement.
Exactly. I have your book in my office, and it's been picked up, and I've had to save my book from everyone, all the passersby to my office.
That's great news. Well, they can get it for cheap on Amazon.com. It's called Home Run King, The Remarkable Record of Hank Aaron. Forward is written by Dusty Baker, my longtime friend of more than 50 years.
Wow.
It's a 265-page hardcover book, and it talks about Aaron's contributions not only as an athlete, but as an advocate for civil rights. That's Home Run King, The Remarkable Record of Hank Aaron. Get it today on Amazon. And that's it for this edition of Travel Itch Radio. Next week, same time, same place, same writer, and same announcer. We'll be going to Charleston, South Carolina, another place very rich in history. Now, this is Dan Schlossberg saying thank you for your time this time. Until next time, good night and stay safe.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Maya. Great show.
Thanks.